In a few of my podcast episodes, I've linked some problems we face as adults to our childhood experiences. While it's very possible that your childhood had no traumatic experiences, that's no fights between parents or incidents of abuse of any kind, whether that's verbal, physical, or sexual, it's still very possible that the memories of your childhood leave you feeling sad and lonely. This happens not because you were physically maltreated, but because you experienced what is called childhood emotional neglect. Now, this is where the feelings of loneliness and abandonment issues are usually rooted in. And in today's episode, I'm diving deep into all the things you thought didn't matter in your childhood, but are now negatively affecting your adult life. Today's episode might come off as strange because I live in a part of the world where children are made to feel like they are not important. They are made to feel like their feelings are unimportant, and if they truly want to connect with their parents or caretakers, they have to do the things that make them happy. I'm an African, and what I've noticed about African parents, not just Nigerian parents, is that they love to discipline, in quotes, they love to discipline their children whenever they don't do what they want. Now, when a child doesn't do what a parent wants, they tag it as misbehavior, and so they think that the best way to deal with this is by beating and ignoring the child. Now, I don't exactly blame them because this is also how they were raised and how they were indirectly taught to raise children. But in today's episode, I'm going to be shedding so much light on how this treatment or this technique that has subconsciously been adopted is not okay, and also how we can heal if this is what we experienced while growing up. Welcome to Healthy Minds Talk, a podcast created to help you grow, bring awareness to mental health, and also remind you that it's not all in your head. There's hope even when your brain tells you there isn't. I'm Praise Victor, and I remain your host on this show. I grew up in a house where the adults were barely around. My brothers and I tell ourselves that while our basic needs were provided for, our emotional needs were abandoned. We had the best food and clothing and also the best house, but we didn't have any caretaker or parental figure to connect with us emotionally, to ask us how our day went at school, to, just make small talk and connect. And even when they were around, and we were probably having emotional meltdowns like crying or not being okay with something they said, we were made to deal with that and process that all by ourselves. We were either, sent to our rooms or ignored. And now, as an adult, I'd say that experiences like that show up as having difficulties expressing what we really feel and finding it hard to communicate when we don't agree with something or someone because we fear being ignored and dismissed as being too dramatic or too childish. Now, this is my personal example of what childhood emotional neglect looks like and how it reflects today in my relationships. So now let me just break it down for you and give you a simple definition of what childhood emotional neglect is. Now, childhood emotional neglect is simply when a parent or caretaker fails to respond to a child's emotional needs. And what are those emotional needs? That's them feeling safe, the child feeling safe, having their feelings validated, when they're given the space to have fun and play, when they mutually communicate with the adults around them, when they feel accepted and appreciated, and when they feel loved, heard, and also seen. Now, childhood emotional neglect is nothing like physical neglect because in cases like that, the effects are always obvious. It's either the child is looking unhealthy or he or she has bruises, so it's much easier to offer support in situations like this. But when it comes to childhood emotional neglect, the children involved don't even know that they are not being raised the right way, and they carry this feeling attached with emotional neglect to adulthood and wonder how they ended up that way. Now, Dr. Janice Webb, she's a recognized psychologist expert on neglect, and she said in her book, Running on Empty, that adults who grew up emotionally neglected often seem normal on the surface, but are frequently unaware of the structural flaw in their foundation. They also have no idea that their childhood played a role. Instead, they tend to blame themselves for whatever difficulties they may be experiencing in life. So now, how do you know if you've experienced childhood emotional neglect as a child? You will know if, number one, you were raised by authoritarian parents who didn't listen to your needs and they just wanted you to obey their rules, not minding how that affected you. Number two, if you were raised by parents who didn't appreciate your efforts, didn't celebrate your progress, but just always pressured you to do more, to do better. Number three, if you were raised by parents who were barely around. Now I feel like this is something I relate to. And maybe you were even the older one, so you had to parent yourself and also your other siblings at a very young age. And there are other forms of childhood emotional neglect, like when you were shamed, whenever you did something wrong, when your parents didn't listen to you, whenever you talked to them about something that mattered to you, like they showed little or no interest in your life, when you were called oversensitive or overreacting, whenever you express your emotions, when your parents had unrealistic high expectations from you, when you were given the silent treatment as a form of punishment, and also when you were made to feel responsible for your parents or siblings' emotions. And when these happen to us as kids and even as teenagers, we subconsciously tell ourselves things like, my feelings are unimportant, I need to numb them, or no one will ever understand how I feel, I have to hide my problems from everyone. And so in adulthood, this childhood emotional neglect, experiences of this show up as, number one, you being overly responsible and independent and not wanting to ask for help even when you're in dire need of it. And this happens if you took on adult responsibilities as a child and also catered for yourself and your siblings. It also shows up as you being a perfectionist now, that if you were constantly pressured to be better or you were not allowed to make mistakes when you were a child. And it also shows up as you feeling like you're not good enough no matter what you do if you were overly criticized as a child. And as an adult now, it can also show up as you struggling to identify and express your emotions, you associating love with obedience, you feeling like other people's wants and needs are more important than your own. If you had to manage the emotions of those around you, you feel like you're asking for too much when you start to acknowledge your needs in a relationship. You start people pleasing just to, feel loved. You have low self-esteem and you feel unwanted in most of your relationships. And also as an adult now, it can show up as you being emotionally numb, broken, and you being emotionally unavailable in your relationships. And it can also show up as depression right now as an adult if you experienced childhood emotional neglect. So how do you heal from this now that you know better, now that you know the root cause of the problem, whatever it is you're facing in your relationships, in your adult life, whether that's, being a perfectionist or, struggling with abandonment issues? What next? What can you do to heal from this childhood experience? The first thing I want you to do is to practice acceptance. Now that we know what childhood emotional neglect is and how we've experienced it, the next thing our minds would try and tell us or try and, make us do is to minimize that experience. So we start telling ourselves things like, it wasn't that bad, or we still choose to remain in denial of what actually happened. But to move past this stage, we have to practice acceptance. And acceptance does not mean that you take on the blame for whatever happened, but you acknowledge that what happened to you was real. It made you feel empty on the inside. It made you feel unloved. It made you feel lonely. But you choose to not let it decide how you show up in your relationships any longer. Now, the second thing you can do is to be self-aware. Simply because you have accepted that, what happened was terrible and you don't know how to move on from it, doesn't mean that you're automatically healed. You still need to be conscious of whenever you start slipping back into those unhealthy patterns that sabotage your relationships, whether that's giving your partner a silent treatment after an argument, because your parents did that after you had a disagreement, or whether you criticize yourself whenever you make a mistake. You need to be self-aware, because self-awareness opens the gateway for your healing journey. So the next thing you can do to help yourself is to be self-aware. Now, the third thing is to reparent yourself. Now, reparenting yourself is simply giving your present self the things that your younger self would have loved to receive from your parents or caretakers as a child. It's you feeling that emotional void that your parents were not able to feel. And it can be in the form of, giving yourself the space to make mistakes, honoring your progress, feeling your emotions without attaching your identity to them, setting boundaries with friends, and allowing yourself to be loved in relationships. Just do those things that you wish an adult or someone around you would have done for you when you were a child. Now you have that power to do it for yourself. So you shouldn't feel guilty for that. Now, the next thing you can do is to share your story. Now, I was talking to my best friend about one of the memories I had of my childhood, where I got back from school to an empty house, and because I didn't want to be lonely, I went out for a stroll. And in the process of taking long walks away from my house, I got lost. It took me a while to actually find my way back, but when I eventually did, I just went home and just sat down somewhere and still felt very empty and even lonelier than I was before when I left the house. And I didn't tell my mom about it because I knew that if I had told her when she got back, she would have scolded me for it. And I think she would have done this because she would not have understood it from my point of view. But when I told my best friend this a few nights ago, instead of me telling myself that I was so stupid and just so I was so stupid for going outside for a walk as a child, I felt compassion for myself. I felt sad for the little me that just wanted to be in the midst of other people and not feel abandoned. So yes, sharing your story actually helps you see your inner child with compassion. And I just want to clarify that you are not sharing your story for another person to validate your experience, but you're sharing your story to connect with your inner child. This episode was not recorded to poke at wounds that you've decided to ignore, but it was just recorded to help you face them, to help you acknowledge your presence and do your own inner work towards healing. So thank you for listening to today's episode of the podcast. If you're new here, please subscribe on the podcasting platform you're using to listen, and follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I'll put the links in the description. And here's a quick reminder before I go. Nothing you did warranted the treatment that you got as a child. It was never your fault. So don't blame yourself or your parents, because they did the best that they could with the knowledge and experience that they had. It's just up to you now to stop the cycle of generational trauma by doing your inner child healing. I believe in you. I believe you can do it. You are so much more than whatever happened to you during your childhood. So have a wonderful week doing your inner child healing, and I will see you next Monday.